Hi, everybody. We return to Found, where we find Jonah and Catherine and his family in the FBI offices of James Reardon, who is, trying to think of a nice way to say this, not being kind, we'll say, to the family. And Jonah is just getting overwhelmed. Sounds like Mr. Reardon is threatening to maybe send Jonah back to another country. He's kind of insinuating he was stolen by the parents. It's kind of nasty. So when we left off, Jonah was actually about to get sick. So I'm going to back up just a little bit. Jonah wanted to correct Mr. Reardon just like he had corrected Chip. Birth parents, you mean? My real parents are mom and dad. But he started to say, but his churning stomach lurched. He changed his mind about what he wanted to say. Bathroom, he moaned, his face contorting. Got to get to the... Oh, for crying out loud, Mr. Reardon snapped, just as Mom, with much more sympathy, gasped, Oh, Jonah, maybe the trash can? Mr. Reardon reacted as if having a boy vomit in his office would be some form of torture. He sprang up, rushed to the door, flung it open. There, he said, pointing down the hall. Fourth door on the right. Hurry. Jonah ran, clutching his stomach. The hallway seemed even longer than it had before. He had a few dry heaves. Second door, third door. Here it is, just in time. He stumbled into darkness, fumbled for the light, hurried into his stall. All the Mountain Dew he drank came back up, along with... Never mind. Jonah told himself, don't even try to remember what you had for lunch. Then he was done. He leaned his head miserably against the cool metal of the stall. And that's when he heard the voice. Sorry about that, someone said behind him. It wasn't supposed to make you sick. Chapter 10. Jonah spun around, or spun as well as anyone could, 3 seconds after vomiting. A man in a gray maintenance staff sweatshirt stood leaning against the tile wall. But it wasn't the same janitor who gave him the Mountain Dew. That guy had been older, paunchier. This guy was young and didn't really look like a janitor somehow. We've had to do way too much planning on the fly here. We just thought 20 ounces of Mountain Dew. At some point, you'd have to leave the office and go to the bathroom, the man said, so we could get you alone. Jonah realized he was practically trapped in the bathroom stall. To get out, he'd have to walk right past the man. Hadn't this day already been horrifying enough? He darted a quick glance around. Maybe if he dived fast enough, he could roll out under the wall of the stall and make it to the door out into the hallway before the man saw what he was doing. The man caught Jonah's glance. It's not like that, the man said, holding up his hands innocently. I just wanted to tell you something. What? Jonah said cautiously. Maybe he could swing the stall door right into the man's face. Or maybe he could jump up on the toilet, hang on to the stall walls to get leverage to kick, maybe. When you go back into Mr. Reardon's office, the man said quickly, like he thought he might run out of time, find a way to look at the file of papers on his desk. Memorize all the names you can. There isn't a file on Mr. Reardon's desk, Jonah said. There's just a laptop. He was sure of that. He could close his eyes and picture the vast emptiness expanse of the desk, almost completely empty. There will be when you get back, the man said. The man took a step towards Jonah, and Jonah tensed. But the man kept going around the corner of the stall towards the door out into the hallway. Jonah didn't hear the door open and close. But when he peeked out, the man was gone. Jonah collapsed against the metal stall. Again. He took a deep breath. Steady. He found he was clear-headed now enough to remember to flush the toilet. A pounding noise came from the hallway. Somebody was pounding on the door. Jonah, are you all right in there? It was Mom, treating him like a kindergartner again. I'm fine, he yelled out. Do you need any help? No, just give me a minute. He went to the sink, splashed water on his face, scooped water into his mouth, and swallowed. His mouth still tasted gross. He leaned his forehead against the mirror. Papers, he thought. Look into the file on Mr. Reardon's desk. Jonah, Mom called from the other side of the bathroom. Coming. Jonah wiped his face on his sleeve. Okay, not good manners, but it was the best he could do under the circumstances, and left the bathroom. Mom was waiting right outside the door. Dad and Mr. Reardon were a little farther down the hall. Are you, Mom started to ask, but Jonah cut her off. I told you I'm okay. Let's just get this over with. Mr. Reardon watched coldly as Mom and Jonah went back towards his office. Really, he said, I believe we're done here. No, please. Jonah's fine now, Mom said. We still need to talk this out. I think we just got off on the wrong foot. Getting off on the wrong foot was a Mom catchphrase. That was what she said about Jonah and Billy Barton in second grade when Jonah came home with a black eye. Jonah had completely misunderstood. No, Mom, he said, it was his right fist, not his foot. Mr. Reardon looked doubtful, but they all settled back in their chairs near Catherine, who evidently never bothered getting up. Jonah shot her a resentful glance, but she looked even worse than he felt. She was deathly pale. Her eyes were huge and round, as if she had just been terrified out of her wits. Wow, Jonah thought, I've never known Catherine to be that concerned about me getting sick before. I'm fine, he half whispered, half mouthed to her, but her eyes stayed huge, her skin stayed pale. Mr. Reardon and Jonah's parents were still talking, but Jonah tuned it out for a moment. Pretending he was just, maybe trying to see if Mr. Reardon's laptop was a Mac or a PC, he glanced at Mr. Reardon's desk. And there was a file there now. It was one of those thin, cheap, neutral color folders that people use in offices. But at the same time Jonah looked at the folder, Mr. Reardon did too. Jonah was sure he did, even though he didn't move his head at all, and his voice didn't waver. In fact, Jonah started watching Mr. Reardon now. Mr. Reardon kept glancing at the file, surreptitiously, every few seconds. It reminded Jonah of the time he'd broken a window playing baseball, and he thought that if he just didn't mention it, maybe Mom and Dad wouldn't notice. But when Dad came into the backyard, no matter how hard Jonah tried, he couldn't keep from looking towards that broken window. It was like the window was a magnet with an irresistible pull over his eyes. The file seemed to have that same pull for Mr. Reardon. Of course, Jonah had only been 6 years old then when he broke the window, and Mr. Reardon was a grown-up. But the more Jonah ignored what Mr. Reardon was saying, something about the greater good of the entire nation and compromises made by Americans all the time for the sake of the country, and the more he paid attention just to the small twitches of Mr. Reardon's eyes, the more Jonah was very sure of three things. Number one, Mr. Reardon was surprised and upset, no, make that furious, to see a file on his desk. Number two, Mr. Reardon really, really, really didn't want Jonah's family to notice the file on his desk. And number three, there was going to be absolutely no way that Jonah would be able to casually lean forward, open the file, and then look at and memorize its contents. Not when Mr. Reardon was already alternating nervous glances at the file with nervous glances at Jonah. Because I was sick? Because this whole meeting's about me? Or because he's already seen me looking at the file? Jonah didn't know. Really, Mr. Reardon was saying, I believe we've already covered this. I see no reason to continue this discussion. Oh, no. Mr. Reardon was about to end this whole meeting and kick them out of the office. Jonah panicked. Should he fake another stomach problem? No, Mom and Dad would focus all their attention on him, and it would give Mr. Reardon the perfect opportunity to hide that file. What then? Jonah glanced around frantically at the ceiling and the floor and the window behind Mr. Reardon's desk. He glanced back a second time at Catherine's red-striped shoelaces flapping out loose and dangling down beside the side of a chair. Windows, shoelaces. Jonah pitched forward. Hey, Catherine, he said loudly, do you know your shoelaces are untied? For a moment, Jonah was afraid she wasn't going to react. I mean, why was she acting so freaky anyway? But then she did lean forward, at least enough that their heads were below the level of the desk and out of sight. And then Jonah could whisper directly in her ear, I'm going to distract Mr. Reardon. Please look inside the file on his desk and memorize as much of it as you can. Catherine looked at him, then nodded. Or at least Jonah thought she did. But he didn't have time to make sure. He just straightened up. Well, Mom was saying, starting to stand up, we do appreciate you meeting with us, like I said before, but... What is that? Jonah interrupted, pointing out the window. He sincerely hoped that Mr. Reardon had never been a middle school teacher, because if he had, he would never fall for something like that. But Jonah tried not to think about that right now. He made his voice sound innocent and stunned. Was that a ball of flame? He jumped up and dashed behind Mr. Reardon's desk. This was the risky part. He spun Mr. Reardon's chair around to face it towards the window. Catherine now, he thought with his mind, but he couldn't take a chance and glance back to make sure she was following instructions. He had to think about his own part. Look, Mr. Reardon, he cried, can you... He tried to act as though a horrifying thing had just occurred to him. Can you see the airport from here? Mr. Reardon did stand up and peer out the window. It was getting dark outside, and the glass was tinted. The only thing Jonah could see was parking lot lights, but Jonah hoped it took Mr. Reardon a long time to figure that out. Mom and Dad were clustered by the window, too. We are close to the window, Mom murmured. Oh, no. Those poor people. I hope everybody's okay. Yeah, thanks, Mom. Nice touch, Jonah thought. I don't see anything, Mr. Reardon said. Was there a flicker of suspicion in his voice? Maybe we're at the wrong angle, Jonah said. He crouched down and pointed. Over there to the right, I think. There's nothing out there, Mr. Reardon said. He sounded certain now. Wow, that's weird, Jonah said. Are you positive? Because from where I was sitting, it sure looked like that was a problem. He shouldn't have said from where I was sitting. Mom, Dad, and Reardon all turned around and looked at Jonah's chair. But unfortunately, Catherine wasn't anywhere near the folder at that point. She was leaning against the edge of Mr. Reardon's desk, closest to the window, her arms behind her and her gaze fixed straight ahead, as if she too was looking for Jonah's mysterious light. How could she possibly have had any time to look at that folder and memorize what was in there, and then position herself there? Jonah's heart just sank. His big act had been for nothing. I guess it must have been a reflection, he said. Some of the disappointment must have came through in his voice, like he'd really been hoping to see a dramatic plane crash, because Mom said, well, thank goodness is what it is. Then Mr. Reardon was showing them out, down the hallway, through the waiting room, out into the parking lot. Jonah didn't see another janitor, with or without Mountain Dew. Jonah held Catherine back as they approached the car. Did you get to see any of the papers? He whispered. Not really, she admitted. Thanks a lot, Jonah said bitterly. I mean, it wasn't really fair to be mad at Catherine. She didn't have time, but still. No, I did better than that, Catherine said. I got pictures. And she held up her cell phone. We're going to stop there.